We're going to go on to group 5 now, please. And remember, name, main theme of your group, and then your question.
Hi, I'm Rebecca from Actor Community Theatre, and I was in the group that was communicating your brand and image, led by Tobacco Factory Theatre. We actually had sort of a few questions, but if I just start with the first one. It might lead back actually to what you were saying earlier. We, in particular, had a story that went to the Evening Post that could have had 2 angles to it, and unfortunately there was a bit of a negative angle put on the story. And the question is, why do, particularly the paper, why do they take negative effects of the story, and how does that reflect on Bristol? So what is it they see in a story and then sort of choose either the issue base or...
That pulls on one of the themes that came up earlier, actually, that we didn't probably get a chance to tackle. Richard.
I just wanted to say that the specific example was that there was a big good news story about lottery funding that came into Bristol, and the front page story that the Evening Post chose to run was Richard Eddy's homophobic response. And there was a lot of good news around that issue, but that was what went onto the front page. I think that was where it came from.
Richard.
Yeah, it is a difficult one. I mean, that one was a big issue for us. What did get lost in the debate of the Richard Eddy thing was that our editorial position was that we thought that the group, which all the groups that got the money, in fact, were very deserving of the money. And you know, the problem we get, and I think Angela would agree with me as well, is that we've got a situation where every day we have to produce a newspaper. We're trying to make it, sort of the mantra being kind of relevant, compelling, interesting. We have to kind of balance up what we think people are going to read, what we think is important to people, what's relevant to people, what is going to stimulate them. If you took extreme examples of history, you will possibly remember a lot of the bad things of history. You will remember 9/11, you remember the Second World War, you remember the First World War. Can anyone tell me what good was happening in 1917? I have no idea. This is unfortunately the nature of news, that people, like it or not, will want to read about things that are serious. It's probably why we like to watch murder dramas on the TV. It's about captivating people and capturing them, but trying to do it in a responsible way.
Can I come to Angela now? I mean, there is a question there. The bent, the inherent bent within news towards the negative, does that exist for you? Do you have the same philosophy, different philosophy?
I don't think it's inherent, because we try and present both sides of the argument. I think in certain situations, by putting that forward, then you're opening that to discussion. We have a responsibility to put both sides of the argument, and I think sometimes if you're sitting on one side of the fence, people can become offended that the other side of the argument is being given a platform. But in the same way that you have an opportunity to speak, someone who has a differing opinion also has a right to speak.
I think potentially there's a challenge within there too, and I suppose maybe drawing on some of my own experience. Some journalists aren't that clever, and they are asked to tackle issues into which they have no insight, and are maybe not very wise in the way they deal with it. So sometimes they can be taken on they can be given a lot of responsibility to deal with something. We might say, a young person grows up in Taunton, finds himself in Barton Hill. How do they deal with the dynamics around immigration, and how do they tell that story, and do they understand the backstory and the nuances and the ins and the outs? Is that something that you're conscious of, or is that not really a fair challenge?
It is a fair challenge. The reporters that we have, and the producers that we have, and the presenters that we have, we try and brief as much as we possibly can and give them as much background as we can from talking to you guys and the contributors. But they are dealing on an average day on a breakfast programme with 16 different stories. And looking at 16 different stories, they aren't going to know the background to every single story to the extent of an expert, which is why we bring people in to talk about it and to use it as a sounding board. We try and brief as much as possible. The background research goes into it, but there may be people with wider experiences and larger knowledge on different areas.
I'll tell you what, just for the sake of participation, we've got 2 hands. Please, brief comments, not too long speeches, because am I getting a 1 minute warning? Less than 1 minute warning, so we'll give you the final word.
Hi, I'm just picking up on the point you made about journalists not knowing anything. I think that journalists are very clever, and as you say, they can't know everything. So, with that in mind, I'm from a charity that deals with women trapped in street sex work, and we have a good relationship with the press, but for example, in the Evening Post, you journalists occasionally don't know about how, the ins and outs and the details around the sensitivity. Would you be open to charities like us that are dealing with vulnerable adults or vulnerable children to give you a very brief briefing session on the issues and how we'd like to be represented?
Sorry, because we got less than 10 seconds. Can I just take the last comment, and that's something we can pick up after this, if that's okay?
I just can't let it go by that you talked about you've got to take the negative and the positive sides of every story. In terms of lottery funding to a lot of locally funded groups, there was no negative side to that story. It was all positive. The work they're doing was positive. The money coming into Bristol was positive. There is no negative. Why then do you allow a complete non-expert to come in and pretend to be an expert on gay rights? This is quite out of order, and we will not have the wool pulled over our eyes.
Okay. Challenge to finish with. Well, we've come to the end of our time, so I want to thank you for participating. Sorry if you didn't get to make your comment or your question, but can we just thank the panellists for being in the front line? And I would say, local media is particularly accountable and more into relationship with its local area than the national, so I'm sure that everyone here will be up for having longer term conversations and contact with you. You be their contacts.
So on behalf of everyone,